Hi, I'm Lauren Morales. I'm doing my research presentation on missing murdered Indigenous women and girls in Two-Spirit. Visibility is one of the most important aspects of raising awareness for missing murdered Indigenous women and to intervene in this problem because oftentimes Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit are left out of mainstream news conversations. So it's up to us to increase their visibility by expanding our worldviews and perspectives by, for instance, following Indigenous peoples on Instagram or other social media platforms, many of who share their own personal stories of losing a family member or friend to this violence that is occurring, such as Dosh Collins in this picture. He lost his sister when he was a young child. This shows the effects on their families and communities. He raises awareness in on his Instagram platform, both personal and his organization that he has. Also, allies must amplify Indigenous voices in other communities who are not Indigenous to boost their visibility. Aisha Curry, for instance, featured Dosh Collins and his wife Chelsea Luger in her magazine Sweet July, which is a lifestyle magazine that emphasizes health and wellness, which amplifies their platform to make Indigenous women visible in spaces that they might not have been otherwise. So, to add a little bit of context and support to missing murdered Indigenous women, um, Andrea Smith's The Sexual Colonization of Native Peoples analyzes the historical relationship between white men and Indigenous women through a critical race lens. For instance, Smith writes, because Indian bodies are dirty, they are considered sexually violable and rapeable. That is, in patriarchal thinking, only a body that is pure can be violated. So I believe this way of colonial patriarchal thinking of women is ongoing and very much still alive in American society and is a factor of why most of the violence against Native women is committed by individuals of other races. In Sarah Deer's Sovereignty of the Soul, she describes her own experiences with Native women who were victims and survivors of sexual assault and the legal and social issues that follow, causing American Indian women to feel unsafe or unsupported. For example, Deer describes, as I traveled to various tribal nations and learned more about the high rates of violence committed against Native women, I began to confirm that the legal system, as far as Native women were concerned, was broken. Jurisdiction rules that I had critiqued in a law school classroom were suddenly more than just theories. I talked with tribal police officers who explained how rapists walk free on a regular basis, even taunting their victims and tribal officials because of legal loopholes. Some Native women told me that they tell their daughters never to report rape because it only makes things worse, they explained. In Rape on the Reservation, Louise Erdrich brings forth the issue and blatant injustice of the Supreme Court preventing tribal courts from having jurisdiction when a non-native commits a crime on tribal land. For example, Erdrich states, the Supreme Court rules that they did not have inherent jurisdiction to try non-Indians without specific authorization from Congress. So, in knowing that, Indigenous women are disproportionately affected and more likely to become victims of violence, it's hard to feel like the Supreme Court is ruling in the best interest and safety of Native women on tribal land. So, some of the solutions that I came up with in regards to intervening in the problem of missing murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two Spirit is to challenge institutions and platforms when they omit, erase, trivialize Indigenous peoples and their voices. This means challenging institutions such as educational, political, and corporate institutions for the harm and violence that is perpetuated against Indigenous women, girls, and Two Spirit. Educational institutions trivialize this country's historical treatment of Indigenous peoples, such as boarding schools and the mission system, just to name a couple. It even ignores the existence of modern Indigenous peoples. Second solution is addressing the fabric of colonial society and how it is an ongoing process. Acknowledging these necessary aspects of life can serve to end the crisis of missing murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit by way of acknowledging white supremacy that perpetuates the abuse of American Indian women. Andrea Smith discusses pillars of white supremacy, one of which is the logic of genocide. This logic holds that indigenous peoples must disappear. In fact, they must always be disappearing in order to enable non-indigenous peoples' claim to land. White supremacy and settler colonialism are inextricably linked and make up the fabric of every aspect of our society and culture. And one of the last solutions I came up with is to educate the people close to you. Um, this is really important because we can teach the people around us like the things that we know about this because they may not otherwise know. They don't have the opportunity to like study this in school. Um, Activism and allyship activism should be constant on any forum where people have like a large audience or platform. And this means amplifying Indigenous voices whenever they can, not just on the missing murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit Day of Awareness. The main idea that I got from doing this project and the research throughout this semester is that decolonization is central to like the liberation of Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. This will help intervene and will also like be a solution to stop and alleviate the violence against Indigenous women. For example, to decolonize our economy, such as our corporations, the oil companies, the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls is um, it's a deep problem with roots that tie into white supremacy, misogyny, and capitalism. And for instance, such as in Utah and Las Vegas, Indigenous women go missing at higher rates because of the man camps that are linked to these industries, such as oil and mining. These man camps leave the federal authorities to ignore the crisis, which leaves communities vulnerable. And decolonization in our political institutions is extremely important because the laws that are put in place inherently are exploitative to Indigenous women, and they're not there to protect Indigenous women. So it is our duty to decolonize ourselves and encourage the people around us to decolonize the way in which they think about capitalism, patriarchy, is to decolonize our lifestyles and implement them to protect other people so that missing, murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit people, that issue will cease to exist. And that's all I have. Thank you, Dr. Greger.